What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Court Storm College Hoops Talk podcast, which you can find right here on the Court Storm Media Network. We are your hosts, Kanaye and Josh, and on today's episode, we got a lot to get into. The transfer portal is absolute mayhem right now. Guys are committing left and right. Some of the top guys that you were going to find in this offseason's portal cycle have found new destinations to be playing college basketball in 26-27 seasons. So we're going to talk about some of the bigger points of emphasis in the transfer portal, kind of recapping the last week overall with that. And then we're also going to hit on some bigger, broader, overarching umbrella topics with the NCAA in talks about a 5-for-5 rule dealing with eligibility, as well as increased NIL budgets for programs across the country. And then we're going to end the video off with naming underrated transfers that have committed to new schools to play out the next season college basketball. But before we do all of that today, just a couple quick messages. First, us here at the Court Storm, we've partnered with Phorm Energy to tell you about all the great products that they have to offer. Whether you're someone who's an active gym goer or someone who just needs to stay energized in their day-to-day life, Phorm has the products you need. And if you're interested in seeing what else they have to offer, we'll be plugging the link to their full website in our description box below. And as always, just engage with the videos on the channel in any way you can, liking, subscribing, telling other people about the Court Storm. Everything goes a really long way with driving the algorithm on YouTube and getting more people to see what we put out. So let's get into it first. I think it's a fair argument to say that Kentucky should be the first point of discussion for us today, because Kentucky is obviously, as they are any portal offseason, they're rumored to be in talks with every single transfer that you'll find across the portal. And there were some major targets that they were the favorites to land. Rob Wright, who ended up deciding to stay with BYU. Donovan Freeman was in talks with Kentucky for a long time as well and ultimately ended up committing to Rick Pitino in St. John's just yesterday on Monday, April 20th. Obviously, the Tyrant Stokes thing is kind of still up in the air. Well, we have to wait and see what happens with that. But just what do you think of Kentucky's offseason overall right now and what Mark Pope's been able to do in transfer portal?
I'm not very excited about where it's going. I think a lot of people can say that in the same light, especially Big Blue Nation fans. It's not that it's looking bad. It's just that it's not looking at the level that Kentucky should be. Obviously, getting Zoom Diallo and Alex Wilkins is decent, although I do have my concerns about Wilkins' efficiency from his time at Furman, but I think that can be worked out over time. My issue, though, is they were not able to keep a lot of guys, and they especially were not able to expand on the market that they were given. Unfortunately, right now, they really don't have much of a roster. It's those two guys and Malachi Moreno and like a few, lower level bench pieces that really don't deserve to be in a starting position for a team as Kentucky's caliber. And yeah, Kanaye, you hammer the point really well. Donovan Freeman, Rob Wright, Magoon Guaf, these are guys that were crystal balled. I think all three of them were crystal balled to go to Kentucky, and this didn't happen for any of them. I'm not saying the portal season is over, but a lot of these main college guys they've decided, or they have their locations set. For the most part, the top 25 guys that have not committed yet are crystal balled for anything that's not Kentucky. And I think that really goes to show how big the market has changed in the past 5 years from being very blue blood dominated to, like Magoon Guaf went to DePaul. DePaul has not been to an NCAA tournament in 20 years, and they went past a program that has 3 of those in the past 20 years. So I really do feel like in the long run, it's not about what you are. It really isn't about what you are, and I think this is one of the most glaring examples. And I don't really know what Kentucky does, because every single time they passed on a player, it was Donovan Freeman is now open. Magoon Guaf is now open. Like, you move on to the next choice, and yeah, you land like an Alex Wilkins, which, that's a decent one. He was sought after by other programs, but you're still missing a lot of spacing. You're still missing a true center. You're still missing backup pieces alongside your guys. And I get it that, there's still some time and you can go and get some international prospects, which is something that I don't really know if Pope knows how to do out the back. Kentucky isn't really known for doing things like that. But it just leads me to a really weird standpoint where Kentucky might have to buy high on non-top 50 prospects in the transfer portal. He might have to, I don't want to say accept defeat, but this portal class might not be good in general. And that's not to say that last year was bad, but when he brought in Jaden Quaidens and Jalen Lowe, like, it was expected that this roster was going to be successful and that it was highly touted because they were good prospects coming in. I don't think that's even going to be the case right now.
Right. Rob Wright was their number one target in this year's transfer portal class to come in and play point guard. And the reports were that he was going to commit to Kentucky and be a Wildcat this next year. And it was really going to take Mark Pope and the staff screwing up on Rob Wright's visit for him not to end up choosing to commit. And that's clearly what happened, as he chose to stay with BYU. And maybe that's just attributed to him using Kentucky as a means of driving up the price for him to get a better deal with BYU to come back and return to the Cougars and Kevin Young this next season. But I do think Mark Pope deserves some credit for landing two of the best point guards that you were going to find in this year's transfer portal between Zoom Diallo and Alex Wilkins. And I like both those guys a lot as players. I just don't know how they fit together on the floor at the same time. And I specifically don't know how they fit under Mark Pope's system. And Alex Wilkins, I love him a lot. I think he was outstanding at Furman. And I think he's ultimately going to be a really, really good Power 5 point guard one day. But in year one, as you mentioned, we kind of got to see how the efficiency translates. He wasn't the most efficient player at Furman this past season. Now he's going to be playing with some more talent around him. Maybe he'll find some easier shots and we'll see those percentages rise. But at the same time, we could see a trend the opposite way, where those percentages decrease even lower than where they were this last year. And you mentioned Malachi Moreno, Cam Williams. I think those are the only two guys that are currently on Kentucky's roster. And I do think that Malachi Moreno's poised for a big sophomore year leap. And I do think that Cam Williams, we'll see him get back to being that level of a shooter he was with Tulane just 2 years ago. But Mark Pope's running out of options. And I feel for Mark because he's outwardly just such a nice guy, it seems, and he can definitely coach. I'm not trying to critique his coaching abilities here, but as a recruiter, he struggled a lot. Last year, Kentucky spent the money that they did. I think the most across any program in the country last year. What was it, 22 million they spent on last year's roster?
22 million.
Everyone who covers college basketball, including Josh and I, regarded Kentucky as probably the most talented roster in the country going into this past season, and they just completely underperformed those expectations. Jalen Lowe obviously dealt with some injuries. Jaden Quaidance effectively robbed Kentucky blind. I think he only played like 5 games, 6 games maybe this past season. So some of that stuff, it's tough to fault Mark Pope for. However, he's kind of in a way running out of time here. That seat is getting hotter and hotter, and there's not a lot of great options left to fill out starting roles on your roster moving forward. So I think he might have to take the European approach, a la Brad Underwood, a la Rick Pitino as the last couple of days, and look for some of these underknown recruited guys from overseas and bring them over to play roles. Because I think a big thing for Mark Pope is he needs to recruit Mark Pope guys, and he had that his first year at Kentucky. Lamont Butler perfectly fit what Mark Pope wants out of a player, out of a lead guard. Kobe Brea, I thought, was a really good fit for him as well. Brandon Garrison, obviously he's left the program since. And Colin, he lost the Mark Pope guy and Colin Chandler. Now he's going back to BYU, and I understand a lot of that's because Colin Chandler was really trying to get the biggest payday that he could. But I think Mark Pope needs to obviously do some internal reflection, just go back to what got him to this spot, is coaching his alma mater. And I think he's got to nail it going forward because, as you mentioned, Big Blue Nation, they expect results very, very quickly, and Mark Pope hasn't really lived up to those expectations just yet.
Yeah, it's a running story too, because like looking at some of these big blue bloods, there's a lot of open space on these rosters.
Right,
I mean,
right.
It's not just Kentucky. Look at Kansas right now. They lost so much of their roster, almost their entire main roster is gone. And it is a little bit surprising to see everyone down to Marco Jackson leaving after this year. I thought this was going to be a continuous roster that would have been built on these new incoming freshmen, but it doesn't really seem to be that case. I mean, getting Tyron Stokes would be huge. Same for Kentucky's sake. But I just feel like the way that I was expecting Kansas to go is just not what I wanted. And yes, picking up Leroy Blyden is good. I think there's definitely some hope in a young, fresh team that, really, really would be just anchored by their freshmen like Taylor Kinney. But I think there needs to be more for this program to be competitive in the Big 12 and be on the level that it even was last year. And I just don't, once again, I don't know what they're doing because they haven't picked up guys, and all they have returning is Cole Rosario, and Paul Mabia, it's not a lot. They can definitely slide into higher roles, but let's be real with you, this is Kansas. There just needs to be a lot more going into it for this program in particular to get back to even where it was last year.
Yeah, I love that point about the Blue Bloods. I just think there's so much uncertainty with each one of those programs right now. I mean, Indiana, I think, is a little bit more set in stone. I mean, you can have the debate as to whether you consider Indiana a current, modern day blue blood or not. UNC, you mentioned, they still got a lot of, or I can't remember. I know you hit on Kansas, but UNC's got a lot of holes they got to fill. They're still waiting on the decision of Henry Vezar, whether he wants to return to Chapel Hill to play under Mike Malone in his first season coaching the Tar Heels. They have landed some pretty solid transfers up to this point. Nicholas Abdulis, who I did a video on just 2 weeks ago. Terrence Brown, they just landed today out of Utah, who I think is going to be a really underrated get once we look back on this portal overall. Duke still has some uncertainty. Now, I believe while we're recording this, it might have happened, but John Blackwell is likely to commit to John Shire and the Duke Blue Devil program to play the 26-27 season. But they still got a lot of holes they got to fill, I feel. Getting Pat Gungba's back is huge. Obviously, they have some very, very talented five-star freshmen coming in. However, I think they still need to look to turn towards recruiting some of those more proven veteran guys that can lead to better execution down the stretch. I mean, that's been the root cause of their blown lead losses in the past two NCAA tournaments. John Blackwell is a great starting point, but I do have concerns. Can John Blackwell be the alpha on a Final Four caliber team? We've kind of seen him play second fiddle as the Robin, for say, to John Tonji 2 years ago. And then if you want to call it second fiddle to Nick Boyd, I know they kind of in a way took turns in respective games, but Nick Boyd, I think, was probably the go-to guy for Wisconsin this past year. So can John Blackwell step up into a spot where he is the point of attack guy when teams are scheming to defend him? I'm not sure that he can do that. I think I should rephrase that. I know he can do that, but are we going to see him do it consistently? So, a lot is up in the air with Blue Bloods right now. I'm curious to see the direction Kansas takes. They're obviously another player in the race for Tyron Stokes. And kind of go back to Kentucky just really briefly here. From my understanding, Kentucky's only in the race for Tyron Stokes because Nike's really, really pushing Tyron Stokes to go to a Nike school. And he has some sort of a Nike deal, I believe, or is about to sign. At least I know that he's played in Nike's EYBL circuit, Peach Jam, and all their AAU tournaments that they host. So they're really, really pushing Tyron Stokes to go to a Nike school. I believe he wants to go to Kansas, obviously an Adidas school. So that's kind of the main barrier to Tyron Stokes really committing anywhere. And I think that's why Oregon is still in the race for him. Of course, he played high school in Washington in Seattle, Washington this past season. So that's obviously maybe one reason why, but them being a Nike school, them more than likely having the money to pay him as well. So it's really just going to be interesting to see how the Tyron Stokes fiasco ends up playing out. But going back to your point, the Blue Bloods, they got a lot of work to do and they got to move quick because options to pull out of the transfer portal, they're running up dry.
It really is the case for a lot of these programs. And I'm very curious as to where we go in the next 2 weeks, because as of today's recording, this is the last day for anybody to enter into the portal. So likely the 2,000+ people that are already in is going to stay. Maybe a few big names drop in, but I really feel like it's kind of late for that, which pretty much means that this portal is set in stone and what we're going to get is what we're going to get. And, you can scroll through the list yourself. Most of the top 200 guys have already committed. There's maybe 25 to 50 in that range that have not committed to a location. And I don't think a lot of them are going to go to these blue blood programs or these insanely well-endowed high major programs just because they can get paid a bag at another program that just is not at that level and just still has money to throw around, because a lot of programs still have that money because of NIL increases from this year to last. And I think the biggest part of that is just, what we've seen with Kentucky and a ton of other programs that are just creating new budgets in a way. Like not saying that they're throwing all this money into one player, but like if DePaul's getting Magoon Guaf for a little over $1 million, if I'm being told, they probably have leftover money to pay for additional roster spots. And I just don't feel like the competition is as singular as it was in the past. So I think it really just comes down to what can these blue blood programs produce outside of American waters in the next 2 weeks, or what can they do with returning guys that are testing on draft waters? Because let's have that talk there, if you might. Tyler Tanner hasn't decided yet. We know Ruben Chenelu is in the draft process, but he likely might come back. Christian Anderson is still out there as an option to return, and I don't think he would go back to Texas Tech if that occurred, because they have no real roster. Krivas is still in consideration. Henry Vasar is still in consideration. Obuka Kore, Malik Thomas. we don't know fully about a lot of those guys that they might come back. I think Milan Momcilovic is still in this as well with Alan Graves. Like I know that one of them will probably end up going, probably Alan Graves, because I haven't really heard anything about him in portal talk. But there are still, I don't want to call them underneath mentions, but the portal is more than just what you see. It's guys that haven't entered their names, but you know they might go somewhere else because they are in the draft or they're not playing the way they were before, or it's freshman talent that we haven't talked about on this channel yet, which I think we're definitely going to get to soon because I think this freshman class is going to be pretty decent in the long run. I think in general, the big talk is just where do a lot of these rosters go? Because the way I'm viewing it right now is there are maybe in the top 25 teams that we would expect, maybe half of them have a full roster. Maybe. Like I feel like Illinois, UConn, Florida, and then maybe like Michigan with one more center are complete rosters. Maybe Purdue in there as well. But there are still a ton of other programs that are missing out on not just one guy. They're missing out on whole rosters. LSU Will Wade has one guy on their roster right now as of today. NC State has like 2 or 3 players.
Right.
I think there's still so much room in a lot of these Big East and SEC teams to continue to add on. There's just a lot that is being missing, or that is missing, that I think is not being necessarily talked about. And it's why we're going to keep doing coverage on this because, for example, the NBA draft doesn't start, like its process doesn't start till mid-May. So you could honestly have, guys like Tanner Anderson still be in there to like that Todd Pettiford and LeBaron Philon were. And I think there's a real question on if guys like them stay because, let's be real with you, Braylon Mullins, who came back as of 3 days ago, was a expected lottery pick. He was probably going to be, in that area, and he got paid, what, like $4 million to return to UConn?
Half to $5 million, yeah.
And then you're saying, if Braylon Mullins returns, does that mean Pat Nagamba returns? And what do you know? A day later, Pat Nagamba returns. He's a guy that was probably a first-round pick. And then if you say, oh, Pat Nagamba returns, does that mean that Tommy Howe returns? Tommy Howe returns as of today. Didn't even test draft waters. Didn't even have the talk. Didn't even do anything like that. Incredibly, he just comes back, and Florida has a completely reloaded roster. And I think Chinaloo will follow him as well, though he went to the draft waters. And if you add, those 3 guys into saying, and these are 3 guys that could have been in lottery talks. What about guys like, Krivas and Anderson and Tanner that aren't in those talks that are late first round guys? Like now it feels even more likely that they return back and you have even more filled rosters that you just didn't think about beforehand.
Right. It's gotten to a point where you're going to have legitimate, surefire pros playing across college basketball next year and a plethora of them with. I just think we were talking about this off recording, me and Josh, where we said that, listen, going into this next season, a lot of these guys that maybe could have been first round picks this year, they're looking at this year's draft class and it's arguably the most talented ever going in. We got to see how those careers pan out in the NBA. But going in right now looks very, very talented, could be the best ever. Where next year's draft class, as we've talked about on this podcast, is nowhere near as strong. So these guys, they're viewing that, they're seeing how much money they can make if they come back to school, and then they can set themselves up to be potentially a lottery pick, a top 10 guy, a top 5 guy with, again, kind of how weak this incoming freshman class is in college basketball. So it's going to be really unique to see how this kind of plays out. And if it really improves the product of the sport, which I think it will, or we see it kind of damage it, and we see a lot more of these incoming freshmen not get the minutes or the opportunities that they normally would in a pre-NIL era of college basketball. But just before we move on really quickly, I do kind of want to do a segment where we talk about just throwing out a name of a portal winner, as well as kind of having a quick discussion on who right now, obviously it's early, but who right now looks like the preseason number 1 team going into next year. So I'll turn to you first.
To give a number 1 preseason team, I would go Florida. It's kind of hard. I know people are saying that it's easier than it looks. It's not easier than it looks because, once again, like I said before, we're not done yet. We're not done yet right now. There can still be many more changes. I think Florida, though, just because this is the most continuous roster I've ever seen. This beats like the UConn 23-24 continuity, for that matter. Like, you're getting Chinaloo, Condon, Howe, Denzel Abergine. They all played on that national championship team. They all had real minutes. They all had real moments on that run. And then you're adding in the return of Boogie Flant, who I think is in an even better spot now that he's not playing like in a twin role with Xavier Lee. You have a greater role, I would say, for Urban Clavsar, who I think had a pretty good freshman year. And, you know, the guys in the back, like CJ Ingram, who didn't play a lot, he's going to get a role now, too. And I mean, they could probably add in like one or two bench transfers, but I think that's a complete roster. That's a complete roster. There's very few of those right now. And just when you do a general comparison, plus the fact that, yeah, Todd Golden just won a national championship 2 whole years ago, I feel like it would just make sense. But then I want to throw out the name of Illinois here, because up until yesterday, I would have said Illinois just because the same reasons. You're keeping Stojakovic, you're keeping most of the Balkan Five. You have a great incoming freshman class. You have Stefan Vox, who honestly might be a starter, a bench player, like anything in between. He can really fill so many good roles and would be honestly a starter in any location. He might be coming off the bench like Stojakovic. I mean, up until yesterday, I thought they were going to get Blackwell as well, which I don't think if Florida got Howe back, it would make a difference. I think Illinois would still be one in that scenario. And that doesn't deny Illinois from getting a guy maybe a little bit lower of level, but still getting a decently good player in terms of a Killian Boswell replacement, because they can still go out there and do that. Like I think they're in that running as well. We still have to see what Duke wants to do. If Duke gets Blackwell, and then Drew Sharkowski, add in their freshman talent, and then keep Nagamba, maybe keep Isaiah Evans, that's a preseason number 1 competitor. Louisville, if they expand their roster a little bit, like I think that while yes, Florida appears to be a stalwart favorite, I'm not going to deny that there are opportunities for a lot of other programs to grow on it. And Blue Bloods still have great rosters. What if? And I talked to Kanaye about this earlier. What if Milan Momcilovic comes back from the portal, recognizes that position that he thought he was going to have at Florida was taken by Howe, and he goes to UNC or Duke? Would that not uplift one of those programs to number 1, especially for Duke's sake? Like, I think that there's still so many open doors that can lead to that preseason number 1.
Yeah, I think if UNC or Duke were to, for say, add Milan, should he choose to withdraw from the NBA draft and ultimately pursue a return to school, I think it definitely catapults them into being a preseason top 5 team. Now, number 1, I would still probably lean towards your original point of choosing Florida. I think for a long time was Illinois until we saw these guys return to Florida. And again, you mentioned the continuity. It's ridiculous. They're in a completely different stratosphere in that metric. I mean, I really have to think back in terms of a true Final Four contender that brought back this many pieces. You might have to go back to the 06-07 Gators, coincidentally, where they brought back Horford, Noah, and Brewer. Now, obviously, we got to see if Boogie Flant can make that jump in his second year with the Gators. However, I think oftentimes we do see guards make those second-year transfer leaps, so I think that's likely to come. They're in talks of potentially pursuing Christian Anderson should he choose to not go forward with the NBA draft process, but I think there's a likely chance we end up not seeing that end up transpiring with him choosing to go to Gainesville. However, I think that just kind of goes back to my point overall and your point. I think Florida's the number 1 team in the country entering this next season in college basketball. And I'll ask you too, was Florida your portal winner too, or did you have someone else that you want to throw out as who you felt won the transfer portal right now?
I mean, I think because Florida isn't really in the transfer portal, I can't really call them a transfer portal winner. I think keeping definitely counts. I think that's definitely in it if you want to do that. But I think my transfer portal winner is probably going to be Texas right now. I think that this is a legit team that Sean Miller is creating. I think I don't think they're going to underrate Texas fully just because they are getting the rightful talk that they deserve. But I just don't think people understand how deep this team is going to be. It's not just that the fact that they kept Matas Spetaikis and that they are going to be building around him with freshman talent. It's bringing in David Punch, who will have a 1-2 punch, I would say. Him and Matas, I think that's a big ball in the SEC mentality that will be competitive with Florida. You add in a young, only sophomore, Isaiah Johnson, who had great efficiency at a high major program in a high major conference. And like To ignore him as well would also be crazy. I think he definitely plays a huge role on this team and could really put himself in SEC Player of the Year conversations. And, that's only the tip of the iceberg. They actually filled up a pretty good roster right then and there. They don't really need that many more players to add on for me to feel confident in them. So I would probably put them one, but I'd give considerations to a few other teams. But I want to see more rosters filled out because whole programs, like I said before, don't have rosters.
Yeah, I love the Texas pick a lot. They've killed this transfer portal. You need to give a lot of credit to Sean Miller, what he's doing going into the second year coaching the Longhorns. Now, I could have gone a lot of different ways with this. I think you got to give your flowers to Pat Kelsey of Louisville, what he did in landing Shellstead. Floyd Badunga obviously looks that Paulus Morauskas will be following Randy Bennett at ASU, so that's kind of off the table for the Cardinals. I think TJ Otzelberger's done an admirable job in the transfer portal as well. But my pick, considering we already riled up one passionate fan base in Big Blue Nation, I'm going to rile up another different fan base for a different reason, giving them the flowers this time, that being Providence. I think Ryan Hodgson has done a killer job in setting the table for what is going to be his first year in Providence, Rhode Island. Just today, they landed Malik Mack, a transfer to Georgetown. So I think is going to make a major leap once he's playing for a little bit of a better coach. And I think Hodgson is over. I would take him over Ed Cooley the way it stands right now. We've also got some other guys. I mean, you think back to Miles Byrd, which is really the first big announcement that we got in this transfer portal cycle. They obviously paid him a pretty penny to move from the West Coast all the way over to the Northeast. But I think he's going to be stellar in his first year playing under Brian Hodgson. And I think Gavin Hightower is an underrated get from USF, a holdover from where Hodgson was formerly coaching. I think Erickson Page is someone who's going to be underrated as well. And I don't know if you consider this really a transfer, but Landy Dink Pate, I mean, if any G Leaguer is going to work out in college basketball, Dink Pate's the one. I mean, you look at his highlights, the guy's a real deal. He's going to be a dynamic scoring wing. I think he's going to defend at a high level. And Brian Hodgson's definitely put together a team that I think should contend to be a top 3 team in the Big East this year because of that.
Yeah, I actually like that one a lot. That's a really fun choice. I thought you were going to go somewhere else, and I think I might go somewhere else at a later point with my talk, but
yeah,
I like that too.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I was going to say Louisville.
Yeah, I mean, Louisville, definitely.
I thought you were going to say that because you mentioned Big Blue, and I was like, oh, is he going to talk about the competitor? Because,
I could have.
You honestly should. I think it's fair to talk about where this team has gone. I know they haven't done a lot of moves since, and they were in a lot of holes. They had Paulus Morauskas, they had John Blackwell being talked to. That could have really expanded them. So I do think they have moved away from being that number one transfer portal conversation because of not landing those two guys. But picking up Shellstad and Floyd Badunga in one go is crazy. I do get that they are losing a lot of their roster, unfortunately, like Sanandra Fruit and Connie Roths did both leave. But I still think that this is a roster that will be very competitive in the ACC, could be in the same level they were last year preseason-wise. I am worried about that in general because we said the same thing last year. We thought they could have beat Duke and won the ACC, and I think that's the same thing this year. But I don't want to expect that. I mean, lightning doesn't really strike twice, but I don't really know if it's in the same, if you get what I'm saying, can I? They definitely could, but I still want to see more. That's kind of the point I'm getting at with why I'm glad I'm glad I mentioned them, but I probably wouldn't put them anymore. If you asked me this time last week, I would have said, but they just haven't made any moves since, and there still needs to be something fulfilled in that roster that I personally want to see. I think it's a great start. Definitely a great start. But I need to see what Providence is doing repeated there in Louisville.
Yeah, I completely agree that they got a great 2-man tandem. Plus, you add an Adrian Woolley into the mix where I think he should be a lot better in year 2 in the ACC than he was this past season. I think they got a great foundation. They just got to fill in the holes. They got to get some shooting. But Pat Kelsey and Louisville should be very, very competitive this next year. But let's move on now. As we mentioned at the start, we want to hit on some umbrella kind of overarching topics that the NCAA is kind of going through right now. We'll start with the 4-5 kind of situation the NCAA has on their hands right now. They've been meeting. They have been having talks. And I think we are approaching a very near decision as to whether or not players will be granted 5 years of eligibility. I believe this will eliminate red shirts, if I'm not mistaken, if they are not for medical reasons. So we could see players play out a full 5 years in college basketball. That is what the 5-4-5 rule initiates. So I'm really curious to see, because there's the conversation to be had. Should they approve this rule and pass it? do they grandfather in the seniors that just graduated this past season, assuming they only played 4 years?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the, I don't want to call it weird because it does make sense in the long run, but it's hard to start this rule. And I think that's why it's not being talked about enough. I think it could come into play, and if it does, it would be, in one hand, possibly disastrous and could completely change the sport in the middle of the offseason. Or it doesn't happen, which I do think will be the case, and we have that talk next season when it really does matter. Long-term talk on it is that it provides 5 years for all college athletes, including college basketball, but it would remove these medical and freshman redshirt opportunities. So if you were like, you played 5 games and you got hurt, that would still be a full year. You'd have a full year and you just would have like those other 5 years. You wouldn't redshirt and get that fake 5th year that a lot of players get. And in addition, it would, kind of clamp down on the portal because you'd only have one true transfer your entire time. If you wanted to transfer again, you have to take off another year, and that year would count. It's not like the past where that year doesn't count. You can sit out that year, and you would still retain it. In this new model, if you were to transfer more than once, you'd lose another year. Therefore, you have 4. So I think it is nice in the fact that you are denying, I want to call it BS, but there are times where medical red shirts and freshman red shirts aren't necessary, and players just kind of do that to save years and to save opportunities. I think that kind of cheats the system. And then with the portal, this saves the portal. This pretty much stops continuous movement. This allows for a lot of continuity to remain, and allows for rosters to be very clean and output. You can have guys that play for 5 whole years. But at the same time, it's like, when do you start this? And the problem being put is, if you start it now and you grandfather all the seniors right now, it gives opportunities for a ton of high-level performing guys to return and completely change the aspect of all these rosters and portals. Because let's say they did that. Let's say they did it right now. TKR and Oscar Clough will return back to Purdue. You'd have Darren Williams, Seth Trimble would actually get positions in the portal. They went to the portal 2 days ago. They're not going to get anything, but, if that 5 for 5 happens, you'd have 2 probably like top 5 portal prospects magically appear with all the experience you could ever want. And you could add in literally any other senior that maybe is not going to get drafted in that first round, like Otega Owe, who, might have a chip on his shoulder after last year, and he might want to come back and play another year. Or JT Toppin, who could have won Player of the Year this year, he might want to come back. Like, it would be a complete upside down switch, and I think that would be a really bad choice. But at the same time, if you are to do it next year, then you'd have guys this year that would probably sue and ask for it to be this year, because why is the change now? Why am I being denied that opportunity? It would be the same thing for last year's guys. If you put it in right now this year, guys from last year that didn't get opportunities in the NBA or played those 4 years or had like that opportunity for a free throw, they didn't redshirt or anything like that, they would sue. They would want. So as nice of an idea it is, I don't think it should be this year. I think they should actually save this talk for another year, because I don't like this idea in general, because you're going to hurt somebody. And it's not just going to be the sport as a whole. It will be entire groups of people that want to play another year or want to have a roster that's back. Like it would just ruin everything. And it's too late to do that right now. Unfortunately, it's nice, like I said before, but I just wouldn't do it. Simply enough.
I find myself going back and forth on where I fall as to whether I think players should get 5 years or not. A lot of me thinks they should. I think seeing any reason to have these players come back to school is always a good thing. Have them finish off their degrees, finish off their schooling and whatnot, and obviously chase, or I should say pursue, financial opportunities that they might not be seeing once they exit the sport of college basketball. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there's so many different moving parts to this. Where do these seniors that graduated this past season get grandfathered in? Can they play another year? You mentioned Braden Smith or TKR and Oscar Clough. I was telling Josh how Terrace Reed was jokingly commenting about how he was going to sue the NCAA for a 5th year. And as much as I'd love to see Terrace Reed come back, it just kind of complicates so many things right now, especially this late in the portal process, where teams are filling out their rosters under the assumption that these seniors are not going to be granted that extra year if they are grandfathered in. So it's going to throw everything through a whole loop. It's going to definitely make it so that there's going to be a lot more questions regarding eligibility moving forward, where I think these players are going to have major cases. And I think worst case scenario, we see this system somehow exploited in a way that's obviously unforeseen right now, but could eventually come to light, and we see a guy who plays 7 or 8 years, which is definitely something we don't want happening in college basketball. But I do think, on the other hand, kind of going to the advocating 4 or 5 years, is we saw a lot of great stories from the COVID 5 year players that had the extra year because of the COVID. And I think the NCAA recognized that success that a lot of those 5th year guys had, and felt that's a great marketing point for the sport, having household names return or maybe play a full 5 years out at one singular school. And it's great to bring more fans into the sport that might fall in love with a player as a freshman, get to watch them play out a full 5 year career at that given school. And I mean, the grad transfer thing too, I think that was a great point. I mean, we saw so many teams become the beneficiary of receiving a grad transfer that ultimately contributed to a winning season, or a deep tournament run, or in UConn's case, Cam Spencer, a national championship. Tristan Newton added into the mix there. So it's really, really tough for me to kind of dictate where I lean towards on this matter, but the NCAA is going to have their hands full over the next couple of weeks, and I do agree with you. I think we will see them push these talks back into further into the future.
They definitely deserve to, because the long-term opportunities are still there, and I think it is
Right.
a good move. I just think doing it right now, especially considering the fact that we're too deep into the off season to do this, which is crazy. We're only 2 weeks in, but the portal's already been very much decided, and I get it. Like I said before, rosters haven't been finalized yet, but I just can't imagine what would happen if you had players that were in the top leagues returning. Like, you don't want to have. Like, I get it. We are enjoying the fact that we are kind of getting semi-pro players into the college basketball sphere. It's making the talent rise. But there's only so much talent I actually want here, because there's college basketball needs to have I don't want to call it mediocrity, but it needs to have its inexperience. It needs to have that level that makes it very unique, because otherwise it's just the NBA. And the NBA has better talent for a reason. I will never deny this. I think the NBA is a far more talented league, just purely because guys like these seniors go on to greater things. They go on to higher levels. And I just don't think it's worthwhile for so many of these seniors to want to try again. I'm glad many of them have entered into the draft, and they will probably continue to even with this year. But there are still going to be a ton of seniors that are going to enter into the portal that will just be dead names. They're not going to have anything going for them, but they're going to pray for this 5-for-5. And I kind of hope it doesn't happen for these guys. Unfortunately, they should just pursue a G League for a year or two and find their way into the NBA, which I think is a very modest and reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with the points you made there. Now, to just quickly touch on the increased NIL budgets we're seeing across different programs around the country now. It's obviously led to higher levels of spending in the transfer portal. We see what the big men market is right now and how it's completely skewed to a point where now point guards are being underpaid, as according to Evan Mia and the metrics he puts out. So it's just really, really just, I think, interesting to see how the sports definitely evolved from, all right, let's kind of ease this NIL thing in, where there was no jurisdiction, there was no really retainers set on how much schools could spend. But every year we're seeing that you can't even call it a cap, because there is no cap. We're seeing that number increase year in and year out. Kentucky was at the top of this war, as we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, going into this past season. They've spent $21 to $22 million on the roster in 25-26. And now we're going to probably see more than likely 5 to 6 teams maybe approach that $20 million threshold. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts on it, Josh. Do you think it's good or bad for the sport? And just what are your thoughts on the situation at hand right now? Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say, Kanaye, that it's really on the big men right now that are being overpaid, because the market's not good for them right now. There's very few. And with how last year's season ended, with Michigan winning the national championship using a 3 big man lineup, which I think is just something that a lot of coaches are viewing as the right option, it's going to lead to a lot of these guys getting overpaid. Flory got paid like $6 million or something of that level, which is insane. But I get it. He was the #1 overall prospect in On3 in general. But, lower level centers like JP Estrella, when he got bought out by Michigan, he's getting paid over $1 million, more than a top 5-10 point guard right now. And the inflation will likely lead to bad places in general. It's going to lead to a lot of programs that are going to overbuy on centers that are just not going to produce at the level they were paid for. And that might just be how it ends up going. You might just have to have programs that accept these centers that just are going to be overpaid mistakes just because you need to have a center that can compete on that level. And that doesn't deny that there's going to be good overpaid point guards or, shooting guards or anything at the level. But I think the way that the market's really trending with this increased price range is just people and coaches want to go all in on this big ball method. And it might work for a few programs, but there's going to be for every one program that succeeds, there's going to be two or three that fail and overpay and have this Kentucky UNC from last year. So I'm very curious about NIL budgets on that end of the spectrum as well, because if you're spending your NIL money correct, you should be having in a $10 million budget. If you're a high major program, you should be putting down, no more than $2 million on your big men, your 4 and 5 positions, maybe a little bit more if you are trying to get that 3 big men style Michigan team. And then really putting effort, I should say, into getting those wings. I think those wings are going to be underrated in this market right now because of how overrated the big men are. And then I think you should just play the way you want to play with your point guards and shooting guards, and then have a real bench. Because I think another thing that's being missed out is bench players are not getting picked right now. A lot of these guys that are maybe in that 200 to 300 role on 3 and 247, they're not being really picked up by high major program. These guys would be starting off your bench, and that's perfectly fine. You want to have guys like that, or you want to put effort into your freshmen doing that. And, I think a few programs will succeed in that way. But the problem I have is that for rosters that aren't built, a lot of them are just going to throw money at anybody that comes near. Like Caden Mingo got paid over $3 million. He's a good point guard, but I think it's an overpay just because Baylor just needed to throw money at something to have a continued roster. Now they're losing guys like Yesufu and Cameron Carr, who were, their main wing scorers. So I just feel like we're going to see a lot of bad budget decisions that will look even worse, this time next year than we had from last year, which is crazy because I think Kentucky and UNC and a few other programs really messed up on their budgets, and it's just going to be multiplied this year.
Yeah, I completely agree with the points you made there. I think we're going to look back at this transfer portal cycle and just say, man, I cannot believe these schools made those moves. And I just think a lot of that's just attributed to how skewed the big man market is right now. It's a weak class for centers in this year's portal. And being so, people are these schools are going to pay the top guys in this weak class as much as they can just to be able to get a formidable center on the roster. And understandably so, we saw 3 out of the 4 teams in the Final Four, being Michigan, as you talked about, Arizona, and Illinois, have jumbo lineups where they're starting 3+ guys that are 6'10" or above. And quite honestly, could we see it play out and work? In Florida's case, I definitely think so, but in others, I'm not sure. I think this year might have been a one-off with the jumbo lineups, and I don't know if it's going to be a mainstay in the sport moving forward, just because, one, not every 3-man you're going to find across college basketball is Yaxel Lendeborg, and 2, not every coach that's going to be coaching these jumbo lineups is Dusty May. Because of that, I think we're seeing an overemphasis on filling out your front court with guys that possess just unfathomable size with the skill sets that the Michigan guys had between Adai Mara, Merez Johnson, and Yaxel Lendeborg, of course. And I just don't know that we're going to see that replicated because those 3 were so talented. All 3 are very deserving to go in the first round of the NBA draft. And should they all stay in the draft, they more than likely will. But at the same time, I just don't know if that's going to be something that we continue to see moving forward in college basketball. Now, do I think Florida can do it? Of course they can. Todd Golden can win a national championship. He's done it. The players on his roster that he's coaching right now that make up the triple towers of Thomas Houck, Alex Condon, what is more than likely going to be the return of Ruben Chinilu, they were all on the national championship team, and they're bringing back Boogie Flint, so they can definitely win a natty. But in other teams' sakes, I just don't know that they can replicate what Michigan did this past year. I think a lot of that is leading towards some of this maybe overspending on big men in the portal this year.
Yeah, I actually do like that point as well. And not a lot of rosters will be able to do what Michigan, Arizona, UConn, Illinois did. Like a lot of these programs just can't afford it, and they can't find the big men for it. They're going to try. They're definitely going to try like hell. I mean, we're seeing it right now. And I think that some will succeed, but I think the ones that will particularly succeed are programs that, like you said before, like Florida, like Illinois, like Purdue, for example, that build their rosters around returning guys. Because as much as we can say, oh, Michigan is the first national champion to win with 5 transfer starters, you could also position around and say they had a lot of guys that continued from last year that came off the bench that played real minutes, or, they were like freshmen that found their way into the system that made it work. I think that continuous minutes, and it's statistically shown, I should say, that continuous minutes matter most. Teams that have 50% or more of continuous minutes succeed way more than teams that brought in way less than that or under 50%. And if you look at last year's transfer portal class, in that top 10, half of them, of those transfer portal classes, didn't make the tournament. Simply enough, they did not make the tournament. And it says a lot about where things are going to go here, because it's probably going to be the same thing. Let's be honest, this year's portal's not too different from last year in terms of talent. And I just think that a lot of coaches, good coaches too, are going to make the same mistake. They're going to buy big on the bigs or on, other guys that they just might think work. They're going to ignore the lack of continuity on their team. And that's going to lead to early season issues that are going to spiral out of control at the end of the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. But now to move on to our last segment, that being, well, last week we talked about some underrated guys that had yet to commit to a new school at the portal. Now that we've seen more of these commitments go down, let's talk about some underrated guys that are now committed out of the transfer portal to their new destinations. Now, I'll start with you, Josh. I say for time's sake, perhaps maybe we throw out 2 underrated guys each.
Ooh, I actually like this a lot. So as we did last week, we called out 5 guys that weren't put on rosters. Now we have a lot more than that. So I kind of pull out one from my side of the story. We haven't talked about him a lot. I know he's been making some news at the minor, smaller levels, but I really want to talk about Ruben Dominguez. Actually, Ruben Dominguez and True Washington, I think Xavier is just really good at getting these guys that just kind of come out of nowhere that I think can have really great seasons. For True Washington's sake, the reason why he even is going there is because he played at New Mexico with Richard Pitino 2 years ago. I get it. He had a great opportunity at Miami, but Miami very quickly replaced him, and I guess it kind of checks out for him to go back with Pitino. But for Dominguez's sake, the reason why I go for him so quickly is that he played an insane start to his year. He was a demon from three-point line and a very underrated prospect who, is going into his sophomore year. This is a guy that could play with Pitino for 3 more years, and he honestly might be at the talent level where he might only need 2 to make it to the NBA. He has a great upside. He is very tall for a wing. He has a great three-point shooting style. And in the way the Big East plays, you want to have 3-and-D wings. And I think that makes him a very underrated pickup that, has made some noise, but really didn't have a great end to his last season, which is why people aren't giving him the same level of talent as a lot of other higher level 3-and-D wings. I'll be real with you, the Big East is going to be a lot better this year. Me and Kanaye are incredibly happy to see that, but it's because of guys like Dominguez and True Washington. They're going to make a team like Xavier appear a lot better than they were last year, despite having a similar levelly ranked portal class.
Yeah. Honestly, I love those 2 picks a lot. As you mentioned, the Big East should be a super competitive league this year. I think it's going to be a failure if the Big East gets any less than 5 teams in next year's tournament field. And I think they definitely have they're starting to put together the rosters that should be able to do so. I mean, I really do believe Providence should be a top 3 team in the Big East this year. St. John's and UConn should continue to be towards the top. I think Allen Husk can make some noise in his first year with Creighton. I would expect, DePaul to be closer towards the middle. They were in the middle this past year, so obviously real progress. And who knows, Magoon Guath, we all know what he's been advertised as the second coming to Bol Bol. Maybe we'll see him really, really do that this year. But to get on to my 2 underrated picks, as for guys that have already committed out of the portal, the first one being Terrence Brown, who just, as I mentioned earlier today, committed to UNC. Now, he was all NEC his second year with FDU, where he was, I believe, the leading scorer in the conference, and he had a super productive season in his first year playing high major ball in the Big 12 with Utah. Mike Malone landed him out of the portal today, and I think he's going to fit what Mike Malone's system coaching in North Carolina is going to more than likely be. He's coming from the NBA game. He's going to probably want to play up-tempo, and I think Terrence Brown fits that very, very well. He's shifty. He's quick. He can take guys off the bounce, and I think he's quite solid as a passer. I would like to see him improve a little bit more at making some of the reads that he's going to be tasked with making at UNC. Hopefully Mike Malone can get him under a good weight training program as well, because I think he's definitely going to need to add some size playing in the ACC as opposed to kind of what it was and the expectations were playing at Utah in the Big 12. But nonetheless, I think Terrence Brown's going to be really good this year. He averaged 20 in what was a super competitive Big 12 this past year. And I would expect him to definitely be one of the better players in Mike Malone's first season coaching the Tar Heels. Now, the second guy I want to talk about is Drew Fielder, transfer out of Boise State. He's going to Alabama to play for Nate Oates, and I love the fit there. Alabama's been lacking good play out of their front court for several years now. I will say Aiden Sherrill was solid this past year. I'm a big Aiden Sherrill guy. But I think Drew Fielder, in terms of what Nate Oates wants to do offensively and defensively, is just a great fit overall. I mean, he shoots nearly, I think, 42% from three on the year at Boise State. And if we all know how three-point heavy Nate Oates' offense is with Alabama, so I think he's going to fit right into the fold there. He has great size at 6'10", I think close to 250 pounds. And he's going to bring a lot of versatility at the, the 4 or the 5 spot, wherever Nate Oates decides to plug him. I think he's a decent playmaker out of the post with his back to the basket. And I do think he is a solid post player overall with his footwork. And I expect Drew Fielder to play a really, really big role in Tuscaloosa this year.
No, I actually, that's a perfect pickup. He gives me that, he went from North Dakota State, went over to Alabama 3 years back now.
Grant Nelson.
Yes. He gives me Grant's vibes. And I think that
I was going to say Grant Williams, and I'm like, no, it's Grant Nelson.
It's dude. He gives me those vibes almost immediately when you see him.
He does. I really do think Drew Fielder is going to be a major home run hit out of the portal for Nate Oates. But I think that's pretty much going to take care of everything that we had for you guys on this podcast today. This was a very, very fun podcast for us to record. We were able to talk about a lot, specifically a little bit of Kentucky hate. So Big Blue Nation, go easy on us. But we're really excited for how this transfer portal's obviously been shaping out. Definitely a lot more to come from both us and what is, of course, going to further transpire out of commitments out of the portal. So we'll be sure to update you guys next week and moving forward into this as we head into the summer as well. Be on the lookout for more episodes to come. If you stuck around to the end, thanks for the videos as always. And until the next episode, see you all next time.